How did you find dealing with the dieting aspect and sticking to your plan, but also being in that corporate space?
Firstly, like you're bang on. Like it still really annoys me to this day, and has always annoyed me when like your coworker will be like, "Oh, what are you eating?" Or, "Oh, is that a protein shake?" And I'm like, "Yep."
Yeah.
The more knowledge you have, I reckon, about macronutrient kind of breakdown and sort of different nutritional value of food, the more freedom you have, because you know that you can like enjoy a whole punnet of strawberries and it's fine, and like that's probably more fun than like having two Tim Tams, or you know, you can have the two Tim Tams and the strawberries because you have the knowledge.
If I'm someone who's reasonably new to the gym and I see all these people dancing and throwing weights around in a group fit studio, how would you recommend I approach that, and what classes should I do, and how should I sort of incorporate that into my training, if I should?
What a great question. And
Thanks.
it's multifaceted as well. I feel like one of the points you mentioned, that it's a really great space for beginners. I think that group fitness holds a really important place there. For example, if you're really nervous of the weights room and you're kind of self-conscious and you go into a body pump class and maybe you start with a virtual and then you start with an off peak and then eventually you make it to 530 and you understand what a squat is and then you understand what a deadlift is. And then...
Welcome along to episode 28. I'm Cam. I'm the host of the Lifting in Life podcast. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I'm a personal trainer and I also work in IT. Today, I'm joined by Ella Bryant. She is a lawyer, a group fitness instructor, and also a bikini bodybuilder. We cover some really informative topics in this chat, ranging from the context switching between the corporate world and the gym world to really tangible advice when it comes to group fitness or weight training, mobility, and also nutrition. As always, I appreciate you tuning in to the podcast, and any support you can show goes a really long way. And it also helps me continue getting these awesome people on the show. So whether you like, subscribe, leave a comment, follow, whatever it is, it really helps a lot. So thank you, and remember, you make you.
Cool.
But anyway, Ella, we are ready to go. Thank you so much for coming along today, all the way from Australia as well.
Thank you for having me on. What a privilege.
No worries. There's obviously a lot that we can chat about and unpack today. When I was thinking about what to talk to you about, obviously you got the group fit, you got the lawyer stuff, and then I was like, oh wow, you also compete now too. So there's like so many big things that we could chat about. But where I thought was a pretty natural place to start is, what kind of drove you towards, one, doing your law degree and also pursuing the group fit Les Mills instructing? Because they're two very different things, but also two very complex and difficult things at the same time. So like, what compelled you to pursue both of them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I've always loved arguing, so law was probably quite a natural fit for me. I actually did 1 year of veterinary science in Palmy, and I quickly learnt that it wasn't for me.
Nice. Very different to law.
Yep, and very, very tough and very challenging. Made law school look actually pretty easy, to be fair. And I'd always been a dance teacher, so I guess when I first started at law school, I was teaching dance quite a lot, and that was fantastic, and I really got a lot out of the teaching and seeing students grow. But one of the kind of difficulties of that is there was a lot of choreography, so it wasn't just the hours you'd teach the children, it was also making up sort of routines and things on the side. And at that point, I'd sort of started going to Les Mills, and I just absolutely obsessed with the classes. Anytime I could go to Body Attack, I would. And it was, maybe 6 months in that I got tapped on the shoulder and by Chrissy, I don't know if you remember her from the gym, but she said, would you consider being an instructor? And at that point, kind of having something where the choreography is done and all you have to do is learn it and present it and teach people in that way was really appealing. And I sort of thought it would be something nice I could do while I was at law school. And I guess what I really enjoyed about the complement of the two, law school and Les Mills, and to this day I still really enjoy, is that you speak to a lot of people and they say, oh gosh, I couldn't sit down at a desk for 8 hours a day. And I agree. Like, I
Yeah.
find that challenging, but having something on the side where, at 5 o'clock I go and I teach my body attack class, or every Wednesday morning I teach body balance. It's just a really nice balance for me.
Mm-hmm. And well, this is going to apply to both areas, but I'm keen to understand some of the bigger barriers along the way. So that sounds like quite linear and easy and fun, and like, yeah, I'm going to law school and I'm also doing group fit instructing. So what were some of the biggest barriers you faced along the way, either in the academic space and also the group fit space? We can delve into both of them.
I guess kind of from an academic perspective, I like to be busy and I like to do lots of things. And so while I was at uni, and there was that kind of flexibility of, if you didn't turn up to a lecture, no one was going to tell you off for truancy.
Yep.
So I actually worked a couple of jobs when I was at uni. I worked at the Crown Law Office. I worked at Chow
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 nights a week. And I also worked at Les Mills. So just doing more and saying yes. And I liked making money. So I guess at times the studies kind of fell on the back burner. But I think that's probably quite typical of anyone who studies in Wellington, because there is so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I sort of think I got through. C's
Yeah.
get degrees. It wasn't all C's, but it was nice to make it on the other side. And I actually, in hindsight, I think that's a representation of what life is like, right? Like when you're working a job as a lawyer, that's not your one focus. You have a family life, you have chores, you have friends, you have hobbies. So I think it kind of equipped me well to balance multiple priorities.
Mm. And what about in the group fit space? Like, not that obviously I was a trainer in the gym, so I have like a tiny bit of insight into it, but group fit was never really my thing. Although I went to some body balance and mobility classes. I understand from like sort of an outsider's perspective that it's quite a competitive sort of space, and there's a lot of demand to want to become a group fit instructor. So what were some of the things you had to overcome in that space? Was it quite difficult to get into? Obviously you got shoulder taps, so that like they already knew that you might be a good fit for it. So that maybe kind of got you off on a better start. But what were some of the barriers of getting into the instructing space?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear that it has the reputation of being competitive, because in
Mm.
some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. There's usually an audition process to start with, and I guess what the group fit manager is probably looking for at that point is that the person moves well, so they're role modeling safe technique, or mostly they're in time with the music, which is
Mm.
kind of like a
Quite
kind of,
important.
yeah, bread and butter for most of the Les Mills programs, except grit, where they just don't count and they're not in time, which stresses me out, which is why I do not teach grit.
Mhm.
But and also kind of just being confident enough to speak in front of a group of people. Is the original audition process, and once you're through that, one of the things that Les Mills in Wellington does really well is they have quite a good mentoring process. So coming through that, I was sort of privy to a lot of really great mentors, which was fantastic. And then I guess when I'd been teaching for about 3 or 4 years, I got the opportunity to present at a workshop, which is kind of well, I guess it's competitive in a sense, but they do look for instructors to kind of set the benchmark or the gold
Mm.
standard of what other instructors should sort of aspire to teach in
So
that
does that
way.
mean you're training instructors?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
for people who don't speak Les Mills, we have 4 times a year we get new choreography, and each
Mm.
time we get the new choreography, we have a workshop, which is like CPD for instructors, or CLE, or ongoing education. There's kind of an expectation that all the instructors go to the workshop, they see it presented, and we kind of reconnect and we discuss what might be difficult moves in the release. So being a workshop presenter is a real privilege, and something I was really proud to achieve. And then a couple of years after that, I got selected to be a part of the New Zealand TAP team, trainer and presenter team, which was a goal I'd had in mind for a couple of years. I'd sort of auditioned previously and been turned down, and so when I did make it on in 2020, I was just absolutely rapt.
Mhm.
And now I'm fortunate to be on that trainer and presenter team here in Australia, which is the Les Mills Asia Pacific National Training
Mm.
Team.
Wow, that's epic. That's a big achievement. What one area of your journey that I feel like I can slightly relate to is the idea of context switching. So feel like I relate quite a lot to you where like I was doing my psychology degree. I was like, man, I want to have a job outside of here that I'm actually passionate about. So that's when I left for a semester, got my personal training cert, became a PT at Les Mills and continued with my degree. But I did my degree online, so it probably wasn't so much context switching. But what I'm keen to understand more about your journey is how did you cope with that context switching between the academic space and also the gym space? Did you ever have a conflict of identity, or did it feel difficult to go between those two spaces?
I'm really pleased you asked this. And when you gave me a heads up of some things we might talk about, I was thrilled to see this in there because there's a moment that actually really stands out to me. And I think about it all the time. But when I finished my law degree, I sort of had a few months off and I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to do. And I actually did my personal training apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was working as a Jimmy, so a red shirt at Les Mills
Yep.
in Lambton Key.
Nice.
And I mean, you're well
you with a
aware.
law degree. You had a law degree.
I
That's
did. But,
yep.
someone's got to re-rack the rates and
Yeah, that's
someone has
true.
got to be there for a first aid emergency and someone's got to count the classes. It's a very
Yep,
important job.
absolutely.
But I do remember I took a lady for a gym explorer. So, show her around the gym, show her how to use the machines. And she was at the time, she was working in a government department. She was working at MB. And I sort of made a quip to her about there'd been a big OIA and, there was a really, basically a lot of government money had gone on upgrading the facilities at MB. So I made a quip about, the hair straighteners in the office. And she sort of looked at me and she sort of just said like, how do you know what an OIA is? And I
Oh
was like,
no.
and
Ah,
I guess I was a bit offended, but I think it does always remind me, and exactly per your situation, a lot of people who work in health and fitness are highly intelligent,
yeah.
and it actually pisses me off when there's a kind of connotation that trainers or instructors are just sort of
Yeah.
gym
Like
buffies because that's not the
meatheads or
case.
whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who I've learnt from and worked with are highly intelligent, and
Mhm.
yeah, that moment's always stuck out to me between the
Wow, that's
switching.
interesting. Yeah. I'm just trying to think if I had anything similar. Maybe, do you think that was because you were the red shirt? Like there was even like another like degree of sort of disrespect or like this like hierarchy kind of thing? Obviously,
I
we're
don't know.
taking
I
a
mean,
tangent away from the context switching for a second, but
I actually get it. I get it quite a lot, even with instructing.
Mm,
People say, "Oh, you work another job," and it's like, yeah, you can't do body attack. Like, you can't even do it 3 or 4 times a week. Like, if you did
yeah,
40 body attack classes, you'd be dead.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and people are really shocked about that, which always sort of surprises me.
Mm, yeah, man. Sorry you had to go through that. That's
Oh
rough, man. That
no,
would have
not at all.
sucked. Yeah. So back to the context switching a little bit. How would you sort of there was obviously that one example which sucks. But what about from like a more like high level kind of perspective? Did you feel like you're a bit of an imposter in either of the spaces, or was it a bit of a conflict for your identity, chopping and changing between the spaces, or was it actually a positive thing and maybe you liked that context switch?
I think I liked the context switch. I guess one of the things I was acutely aware of, especially in Wellington, is I think at both of the central Wellington Les Mills gyms, um, most of the people in your classes are public servants or lawyers or accountants
Yeah.
or students or, again, highly intelligent people. And, if you can, you're teaching a lunchtime class and you can say to them, who's come from the office? I have. I feel like your ability to relate to those people and what's actually going to motivate them at that moment is is great because
Mm,
if someone's come from a stressful job at KPMG and they're actually just there 45 minutes to clear their head, how you motivate them is going to be quite different to how you'd motivate an elite athlete or a total beginner. So I thought it was good. There were a few times when my clients came and did my class and they were surprised and I was
your
surprised.
law clients. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, especially like Body Jam, like
Yeah.
10:30, I'd be in a meeting with them talking about legislative options, and then 5:30 I'd be telling them to shake their ass. So
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
yeah.
Would you ever be worried? I didn't even contemplate that that would be a scenario. That's crack up.
Well,
Would
Wellington's so
you
small, right?
exactly? Would you ever be worried that that would like alter their perception of you?
Yeah, a little bit, but I guess
Yeah,
if anything, I think it's kind of it's generally a positive because
yeah,
you understand that the people you're working with are actually humans too, and we all
yeah.
have
It
interests, and
humanizes you.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. That's so
Well,
funny.
I'm sure you probably had that with your clients at the gym, crossovers and things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And especially like you say, working down that end of town, you're dealing with a lot of corporate people, a lot of government people at that Lambton Quay because you're literally across the road from Parliament. Um,
Yeah, I know this. I think the Attorney General used to come in there, and I'd always like, "Oh,
yeah,
hey, what's
yeah.
going on?"
Hello. One thing you touched on there, which funnily enough, Chloe and I were actually chatting about the other day, is that ability to relate to the corporates in the fitness space. I found that when I started, because I hadn't worked a corporate job at all, and all you train pretty much is corporates, it was quite a big disconnect because you don't know what it's like to even sit down for 8 hours a day, let alone be working in a stressful office job. So it's interesting that instead of it not necessarily creating a disconnect or like a stressful thing swapping between the contexts, it actually almost added to your ability to be able to train them and guide them because you can relate to them.
I think so. I hope so.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I mean, I guess on that point, one thing which I think about a lot, and I don't know if you have found this having worked both corporate but as a PT, um, obviously working in the corporate space has its challenges, and it can be very stressful depending on what industry you're in or what role you're working. But equally, I feel like some of the trainers I know are some of the most hardworking people because actually organizing your own schedule and basically making sure you have enough income coming in and fitting everyone in and scheduling, and you're up early, you're up at 5, you're doing those 5:30
Mm.
sessions, and then you're probably doing the 6 p.m., 7 p.m. sessions, and having actually done a bit of both, I quite like sitting on my office chair for 8 hours a day. Like it's actually,
It,
and I quite like getting my paycheck every week. Like
yeah,
I
it's a
hats
very
off to
cushy
people who
role.
are
Yeah,
trainers, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah,
And especially like one thing I think about a lot when it comes to being a trainer is sort of the energy that you have to give. Like if you have like a well of energy that like you can only that's finite, you running a group fit session or running a one-on-one PT session like that can use quite a decent chunk of your energy versus like sometimes at work you might hardly talk to anyone at all and you're just focused on your own thing so you're not having to sort of part your energy onto others, whereas like being in that group fit role, that's like basically what you're there to do, right? Is to give your
yeah.
energy to everyone in the
Oh,
room.
and being a personal trainer as well, because every time your client comes in, that hour they spend with you, it's their time. So they want to talk
Yeah.
about them and how their sleep is and how their love life is or whatever it is.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
a personal trainer is like slash counselor slash hype person. It's a lot of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on these episodes, I often like to delve into some really tangible fitness stuff, and it's quite funny that you got this all these different areas that you do. And it wasn't until right before this episode that I thought it would actually be good to get some tangible advice from you about group fit. So, group fit, like I said earlier, it wasn't something that I sort of like dabbled in too much, maybe a few mobility classes or whatever. So I couldn't really provide educated guidance to my clients as to whether or not they should do it. My kind of general consensus was that, like, especially the classes that have weights, like pump and all that stuff, is that, especially if you don't know good technique, it's probably not advisable for you to go and do the thing because you're doing it really fast. You're not necessarily focusing on technique. It could result in injuries. But there's obviously a whole bunch of classes. So if I'm someone who's reasonably new to the gym and I see all these people dancing and throwing weights around in a group fit studio, how would you recommend I approach that and what classes should I do? And yeah, how should I sort of incorporate that into my training if I should?
What a great question. And it's
Thanks.
multifaceted as well. I
Yeah.
feel like one of the points you mentioned, that it's a really great space for beginners. I think that group fitness holds a really important place there. For example, if you're really nervous of the weights room and you're kind of a bit self-conscious and you go into a body pump class and maybe you start with a virtual and then you start with an off peak and then eventually you make it to 530 and you understand what a squat is and then you understand what a deadlift is and then you understand what muscles you're working when you do a bench press. Great. And that can take you a certain point, and then you might start to look at other options like training with a trainer, or you might be confident enough to go on the gym floor with a basic program. I definitely agree with you that sometimes when the movements are fast or there are weights involved, people can be losing technique or not moving as effectively as they could be. My personal decision is that I only teach cardio classes or maintenance classes because for that reason. So everything I teach is just purely aerobic or cardio fitness and or kind of maintenance mobility work. And that's, I guess, selfishly as well, because I like lifting weights and I like lifting weights with good technique and proper rest and recovery. So I'm very careful to kind of tailor my classes around my training.
Yeah, I like how you it's not something I ever considered with group fit in terms of the progression model that's in it, like doing the virtual classes and the off-peak classes and then going to a peak class. That's actually some really good advice. Obviously, that might not be in every gym out there, but like if people have that option, that's actually some really sound advice in terms of it reducing that sort of level of intimidation, I suppose, right, to get into it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've probably heard it with some of your clients, but especially with Les Mills, sometimes you'd hear that old rhetoric, which is like, oh, Les Mills is filled with really beautiful people and you've got to be
Yep.
super hot and super fit to go there. And like, that is so untrue. And everyone is so much more concerned with how they look than other people look. But like my mum's in her 60s now, and when she started at Les Mills, she could only bring herself to do a virtual because she liked it that no one was looking at her, the room was dark, and she could just kind of muddle through it. And then she started going to live classes and she really enjoyed that. So I would recommend that's kind of a cool way to progress.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And sort of delving more specifically into the training, you're someone who has done a whole bunch of different modalities of training, whether it be like mobility or the stuff you're doing with like Matt McCorkindale, like you're doing your handstands and your rings, and then you also trained with Chloe and got into the like hypertrophy style of training. So from a high level, before maybe we delve into any of those, from a high level, what does training mean to you? Because it's clearly more than just putting on muscle or like getting fitter. So like, why do you train and what does it mean to you?
Such a big question.
Yeah.
And a kind of an emotional one because obviously it's really important to me, and I'd say same for you and a lot of people listening. I guess for me, it's me time, particularly with group fitness when you are giving your energy to everyone else in the room. That hour or 90 minutes that I train, it's just for me, and I always do it first thing, and then I can go out into the day and I can give my energy to my friends or my family or my classes or my work, but I've had that me time. And I guess like at a really high level, whatever modality or whatever discipline it is, whether it's gymnastics or mobility or hypertrophy, I think when you start to become more serious, or even running, like when you start to become more serious about your training, and particularly if you're working with data, when you have tangible goals that you want to achieve, whether it's your first unassisted pull-up or it's running 5-minute 30Ks or doing a free handstand or, getting to a certain level of body fat, like when you achieve that, it's just such a great feeling of personal satisfaction. And without being too much of a cliche, I do think that when you prove to yourself in one of those spaces that you can do something and you can achieve a goal, I feel like it actually translates to other parts of your life, which is why I often find a lot of bodybuilders are really good at saving or really good at, getting into the property market or really good at reading, because when you kind of learn those skills of like discipline and commitment, you can translate them to other parts of your life, I think.
You're touching on multiple topics there that I'm so passionate
Sorry,
about.
break it
No,
down.
yeah. No, it's a big question. That first one that you started touching on in terms of the data, the idea that I'm really interested in there is that you experience positive emotion by seeing yourself work towards a meaningful goal. So it seems that the one big thing that transfers across all those different modalities is that if you can see yourself working towards that meaningful goal, then it's bringing you positive emotion.
Totally. And I know it's a cliche, but like, enjoy the process, not the destination. And I think that's very true.
Yeah. And then that second one, the transferable learnings. I've had some people completely disagree with the idea, but I feel like it's just, I don't know, a no-brainer that if you can apply a certain set of skills in this area of your life, then how can you not apply those certain skills over into this other area of your life?
Yeah. And look, I've heard arguments on both sides of the fence. And I guess to kind of paint a picture of the other end of the scale is you have a 20-something influencer who's probably genetically quite blessed, maybe quite from a privileged background, and she's on there with her oxy shred at Barry's boot camp saying, if I can get through this, you can get through anything. And it's like, well,
True.
you're very privileged. You don't necessarily have like caring responsibilities or have experienced trauma in your life. So like that end of the fitness industry and the fitness marketing irritates me.
Yeah,
But
I
I
get
think
that.
the basic premise of it is true.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I haven't really thought about it from that perspective, but that makes a lot of sense. And now getting more into the specifics of your training, having done so many different styles of training, how do you now build a split for yourself, or what does your training look like now? Because there's all these different things that you've done, so you know how important all these different styles of training can be. How do you now create your split?
That's a good question. I guess you've probably heard the expression of jack of all trades and master of none.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think it's definitely been a learning curve for me that I'd rather do a couple of things well than do a whole lot of shit averagely.
Makes
Um,
sense.
so when I did decide I was going to compete, actually the first time I competed was in lockdown, so I only had one priority, which was competing, which made it really easy for me. Like I wasn't even teaching my classes really. And then as I took my sort of hypertrophy, physique training, whatever, more seriously, I did need to cut back on the classes I was teaching or very strategically place them so that I was ensuring I was getting recovery. And I think that's something that a lot of group fitness instructors learn the hard way. Like when you first start teaching group fitness, it's so new and so exciting, and you're like, oh, I just want to do body attack 5 or 6 days a week, and you just feel like shit and you
Not
train like
sustainable.
crap. Yeah. And I actually think more instructors could benefit from A, strength training to complement what they're doing, but B, more rest, more recovery. So I have had to be more and more strict with myself about like saying no to covers if it's my rest day. Yeah.
So what does your split look like right now?
Funny you should say that. So at the moment, I'm sort of training 3 lower, 2 upper, and I've got maybe 5 classes, which I guess at this point, I've got 6, I think, which is probably one too many. So I have 1 body jam and 3 attacks and a body balance. 2 attacks is enough for me, so I am looking to give up one of my body attacks.
Yeah.
And I try and have at least 1 full rest day, but ideally 2.
Yeah. And would you consider those body balance classes almost like mobility classes for yourself as well?
Yeah, they're a nice one to teach because they're very rewarding, particularly for people who might be older. It's a really great way for them to move. I don't tend to focus as much as I would if I'm doing my own mobility. So you touched on before, your friend of mine, Matt McCorkindale, who's an
Yep.
absolute legend, that kind of stuff around the difference between flexibility and mobility. Coming from a dance background, I'm actually super flexible, but my mobility or my strength in range could do with work. And, it's a work in progress for all of us. But if I'm working on my particular imbalances, like need to work on external rotation, or I need to strengthen my hip flexors, that's probably something I'd do with a focused intent for 15 or 20 minutes, usually on a rest day. But the movement I do in body balance is still great, mobility, low impact.
Still must have some kind of benefit, right?
I think so. Well, I like to think so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't think we were going to really go into this training route, but you've got so much experience that I might as well pick your brain while you're here. When it comes to hypertrophy training and bodybuilding and stuff, one thing that often gets put to the side or overlooked is mobility and flexibility, and having, say, actively focused sessions just on that. Like, you might do a 10-minute warm-up before you train, and that's probably it. And most of the time it's probably a bit haphazard and not very effective. You kind of just do some stuff with your body and then you go and train. So coming from you and your experience in that mobility space, and having now been in the hypertrophy space, can you speak to the importance of mobility and flexibility training crossing over into your weight training?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the moment I'm really fortunate that my coach he puts a big emphasis on mobility. So in my app, I have my sessions for the week, and twice a week there's a mobility session. And again, I get that kind of dopamine hit when I complete the mobility session, and he structures the mobility program really well, that it's timed, and there's sets, and there's kind of execution tips, whether it's like PNF or pails and rails. And I guess having some of that background myself, I try and, I need to work on my shoulders a bit, I'll try and do this exercise. And I think it's, in the competitive world, I think it's not just training, but it's also posing, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I guess particularly for bikini, I don't know anything about bodybuilding, so you'd be better
That's
placed to
very
comment
true.
on that.
Twisting and arching and all of those kind of things. Like, if you're more mobile, you're able to present your physique more effectively.
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of the time when people weight train, like we've already touched on, there's that office job 9 to 5, and then they go to a class, or then they go and lift weights. And if you don't have that movement in your body, then you can't effectively execute those movements, right? Like even a seated row. So often, like, you see people coming in and then they're getting into a worse posture when they're rowing. So having poor posture, ironically, you can actually only further emphasize it in your training if you don't know how to put your body into those different.
And I think actually that's one of the things that I guess I feel pained about, is people who work the corporate jobs, and like, say you're at KPMG and you're a super high achiever, or you're in finance, and then when you go to the gym, you feel like you should be pushing yourself. So you're probably not going to go to Body Balance, which would be really good for you. Mm-hmm. You're probably going to go to Grit, or you're probably going to go to F45, or you're probably going to go to Barry's, because you've got that kind of all or nothing mindset, and you want a boot camp, or you want to sweat, or no pain, no gain. And it's actually a recipe for disaster, right? Being sedentary for 8 hours and then smashing yourself with HIIT like 7 or 8 times a week. Like, it's the worst thing you could do. And even body tech, which is very high intensity, sometimes I look at the people in my classes and I just want to say to them, and I do, like, don't do this 5 times a week. Like, do this once or twice a week, and like, get a weights program or do some mobility, and you'll feel better.
Yeah. Would you recommend sort of getting a trainer before you do those weights classes? I know you said that do the virtual one and then work your way up when you know what a squat and what a deadlift is. But would you consider doing it the opposite, where like you go and learn this stuff first and have your trainer set those boundaries, like, no, don't do that 5 days a week because you're going to hurt yourself, and then work your way into doing it at high intensity?
Yeah, look, I guess I'd recommend a trainer to anyone. Partly because you're getting something personalized, and you're getting someone looking at you and looking at your form. But also because what we talked about earlier, you're getting that you time and your goals and what you want to do, whether it's a pull-up or, certain heavyweight squat, whatever. But I guess, I don't know if it's a Kiwi thing, but there is still, by and large, that perception that having a PT is kind of a luxury. And I guess that's probably more of a thing with kind of, ongoing cost of cost of living issues.
Yeah.
But it's also that thing of like, well, I'm sure you see all the memes about it on social media, but it's like $80 for a session with your trainer, or just dropping $80 on Uber Eats, or, like actually if you invest now in your health and in moving well, you save yourself on osteo, chiro, massage, whatever it is. So yeah, I'd always recommend people got a trainer.
Yeah, that's a good perspective on it, actually, thinking the long-term perspective, like, $100 or $80 might be expensive now, but it could save you thousands in the long run because you're not going to experience the injuries or the weakness or the frailness or something as you get older.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, man. Okay, I think I want to explore your competing sort of space now, and also maybe a two-parter, how you set up your schedule. So I think that's going to kind of tie in a little bit. So you were already a busy person, obviously, with your work, with your group fit instructing, and then you decided to, why not throw bodybuilding, bikini competing into the mix. So how did that align with your schedule, and how did you structure your schedule to optimize your training for it?
Yeah, so I never used to be a morning person. And then kind of, I guess, during first lockdown and coming out of kind of lockdowns, I very quickly realized that I didn't want to teach in the morning for a couple of reasons. Number one, I always got a shitty sleep because I'd be like doing the body attack choreography while I was sleeping, or I'd be like stressed that I was going to miss the alarm, or and I also just don't have that much energy to give to anyone but myself in the morning. So I made it a priority to always do my training first thing. And then I just go into the rest of the day with a good mindset. So that would be the first thing about scheduling. What was the second part of that question?
It's a good question. I got to remember now. How did you set it up to optimize your weight training? Because obviously if you're doing too many classes or too much mobility, that might reduce your time for the weight training.
Yeah, so I guess it was probably just cutting back on classes, and sometimes that was a difficult decision because obviously my teaching's very, very important to me. But I guess both of the coaches I've had have been very understanding about that and quite open-minded about it, having that as my cardio. Obviously, maybe like the 2 or 3 weeks before the show, no teaching at all, and probably a slight reduction prior and prep. But it was kind of, I was pleased to be able to prove to myself that it can be done. And I guess both of the federations I've done have been, well, my most recent federation, I competed in WVFF, and the level of conditioning they look for, particularly in WVFF bikini, is a lot of a softer look, particularly when compared to IFBB. So that meant that I was able to kind of probably hit my conditioning sooner than I would have for this IFBB. And that's like a whole nother kettle of fish.
Yeah. Well, you're touching on something there that is quite interesting. And one thing I've been learning more about is writing your sort of self story, or the story about your identity for yourself. And do you think that adding in this new page of competing sort of further reaffirmed to yourself, that you're able to stick to things and complete them?
Yes. Yeah. Like I felt really proud. Like, I proved it to myself. Because I guess I'd always admired people like yourself and Chloe. And thought, I'd love to do that one day. Like, that seems like a really cool challenge. And yeah, being able to, and I know this sounds cheesy, but I was never concerned about where I placed. Like, I just wanted to do it for me, and I had a great time along the way. So yeah, for sure.
That was actually, I was going to follow up with that in terms of, like, obviously there's a long process to it, but you're doing the process for that one day. What was your it already sounds like you were more of like a enjoy the process kind of person, disregard the result. But what was your mindset coming into a show like that, and sort of how did you cope with that process? And on the day, was the result, you already said it wasn't, but was it a big thing for you, or was it more about proving to yourself that you could complete the prep?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Certainly, when I did my first season, I did a couple of shows in my first season. The first show I did of the season was A&B. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a natural bodybuilding federation over here. And I did okay. I won one of my classes, and I sort of got a couple of seconds and thirds. And I was just stoked with that because I was like, oh, I just don't want
That's
to look
real
like an
good.
idiot. Like, I just
Yeah.
don't want to be up there looking like a clown. Like, and then a few weeks later, I did a second show, and I was kind of hoping again for just like, oh, it'd be nice to get a medal. It'd be nice to stand on the podium. And I got my pro card, which was like awesome.
That's
And
epic.
yeah, I don't, because it was totally unexpected and I had kind of nothing riding on it. And I was like, oh, it'd be nice to just like get a medal and then go have dinner with Kruger. Like, I was surprised and
Mhm.
stoked. So that was
Mhm.
awesome. I guess that, I mean, ICN again, different federation. I compete natural. It's less of a deal in New Zealand, I think,
Mhm.
but big deal over here. But obviously a different federation to the likes of IFBB Pro League or WBFF. So I guess coming into my previous show, WBFF, having had that taste of glory, I
Yeah,
wanted to do
true.
I wanted to do well, but
Yeah.
also I had sort of an appreciation that uh, I think it's a level up probably, and a lot of WBFF competitors had competed with WBFF 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and were very experienced and kind of had that rapport with the judges, or kind of were used to the show. So equally, I was like, it's my first time competing with WBF, but I just want to enjoy the experience.
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics when it comes to competing, right? But
Yeah.
it's an interesting topic that you're touching on there, where when you haven't achieved anything in that sport, your expectations are just like, whatever, I just want to participate, it's fun. But then you taste a little bit of that glory. Did you find that your sort of baseline for your expectations of yourself were increased?
A little bit. It's
Yeah.
funny that you say that because um, I don't know if you've been to WBFF show, but
No.
basically they do it in height classes, and often there can be like hundreds of girls, particularly in bikini. So naturally, I was in bikini short, and there was probably like 30 girls maybe,
Just
and
in your class or your category?
yeah, just in my
Whoa.
class. So bikini short, there was 30, and then there'd be like
Damn.
another 30. Times they've even been bigger. Like I think the Gold Coast show last year, there was like 50 in bikini short.
That's insane.
Um, Basically, come on and do T-walk, and then straight away they call out the top 10. So you know straight away if you're in the top 10. And I guess that would have been my only goal, was that I would quite like to make the top 10.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I got kind of called out maybe like sixth. And I was stoked because like I just
Yeah.
wanted to be in the top 10. I had a really great time. But after the show, a few people were like, because I think they placed the top 3 on the night, and then in the subsequent week they kind of placed the top 10, and I came away with sixth, which I was stoked about. But
That's
a few people,
unreal.
oh,
Out of
thank
that
you.
many people, like that's
Thank you.
unreal, man.
A few of my friends who like don't know anything about bodybuilding, they were like, "Oh, you're disappointed," and I was like, "No, like
What?
I'm chuffed. Like that's
No.
awesome."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's epic. I know, like I've been to obviously a few of Chloe's shows, but they've never been that big. Like her shows have maybe been 50 people or something, but like to have almost 100 people competing in one show, I don't know how you'd possibly even go about judging that. Like,
I don't know how they do it, eh?
yeah.
Especially with WBFF, like, the bikinis are really over the top and the posing's really, it's
Yeah.
like a visual feast. So hats off to those judges.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that I sort of want to make this relatable to people who maybe don't compete but are wanting to a diet, or maybe they are sort of cutting down right now and are in the corporate space. Did you find that when you started dieting and like being on really specific meal plans for your shows, that it was difficult in the corporate world? You know, the morning teas or the team lunches or the after work drinks or the like, Ella, why are you eating chicken and rice again for lunch? How did you find dealing with the dieting aspect and sticking to your plan, but also being in that corporate space?
Great question. You've got so many great questions.
Thanks.
I guess, firstly, like, you're bang on. Like, it's still really annoys me to this day, and has
Yeah.
always annoyed me when like your coworker will be like, "Oh, what are you eating?" Or,
Hmm.
"Oh, is that a
Hmm.
protein
Yeah.
shake?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yep."
Yeah.
And like equally that thing of like the corporate morning tea when it's just like sausage rolls and
Yeah.
hundreds and thousands of
Yeah.
biscuits and um but one of the things which I really appreciate about having learned a bit more about nutrition or having been on a meal plan is just the knowledge around food. And it's something that I wish more people had because, like, even in my wider friend group, I've had sort of, I just like ask my friends, like, oh, like, what are you having for dinner? And they'll be like, oh, like, vegetarian pasta. And I'll be like, oh, like, sweet, like, do you chuck in a protein source? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, cheese. And I'll be like, oh, okay. And I think, like, again, like someone in my classes said, like, oh my gosh, how did you do your show? You must have starved yourself. And it's like, I actually ate heaps of food
A
and I ate
lot.
heaps of really good food. And the more knowledge you have, I reckon, about macronutrient kind of breakdown and
Hmm. Hmm.
sort of different nutritional value of food, the more freedom you have because you know that you can like enjoy a whole punnet of strawberries and it's fine. And like
Yeah.
that's probably more fun than like having two Tim Tams or, you can have the two Tim Tams and the strawberries because you have the knowledge about it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so
Yeah.
I think and it would be frustrating when I'd see someone who maybe had some sort of goal, they were just your average gym goer and they wanted to lose a few kgs or, tone up a bit. And they sort of thought that going to C's and having this 600 calorie raw Snickers slice was the right thing to do when, they could have actually enjoyed like the punnet of strawberries, the Tim Tams, and a chicken sandwich
Yeah.
for that 600 calories and not being restricted. So, yeah, I just wish more people had knowledge about it.
Yeah. The big gap there is certainly knowledge. And people were always, I think, kind of like you touched on there with the protein shake, always so intrigued with what you're doing with your food, right? When you're the
Yeah.
one who's like dieting down for a show and you get lots and lots of questions. But what do
Nosy
you,
people.
yeah, exactly. What do you think sort of separates you in that aspect of not having the stuff at morning tea or like not having the drinks at work drinks versus the people who want to lose weight and cut down, but then they still do all those things consistently? Well, like you've already said, you can have those things, and if you have the knowledge, you know when you can include those things. But what sort of is the gap there between you staying strong and sticking to your plan versus people who want to but don't?
I honestly think a large part of it is the gap in knowledge. And I think it comes down to, I'm probably going to not phrase this correctly, but I would say a big part of your physique is your nutrition, right?
Mm.
And there are a lot of really active people, and they're really fit, they're really strong, and they may not necessarily have their desired physique because they don't structure their nutrition in any way, and they kind of get that thing of like, oh well, I'm doing 2 grit classes, a body pump class, I walk, I swim, I play netball. So I burn it all. And when you start to understand that, for me, uh, exercise is something I do for enjoyment, training is something I take seriously, and that's kind of separate again. And then nutrition is something separate again. And so I think the people who maybe make different choices is partly knowledge.
Mm. Yeah.
That whole thing,
And
like abs are made in the kitchen, like it's really true.
yeah, and for you, would it be more not necessarily like overeating, but actually making sure that you're eating enough given you've got such a high output?
Totally.
Yeah.
And so many group fitness instructors don't eat enough. Like,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
like, actually, I mentioned this to Chloe before, but before I started training with Chloe, I had no idea. And I guess I sort of fell into that trap of like, all day at the office, I'd eat bugger all. Like, would just have like pick on things, or I'd have like tuna and broccoli, and that's it for lunch. And like, no pre workout meal. I'd go to the classes and I'd feel sluggish. And then I'd go home and I'd like have like 2 whole chicken breasts, like 3 kumara, and all this broccoli because I thought that was healthy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started like actually structuring my nutrition around my training and my teaching that I could jump higher in body attack. I had more energy, and yeah, lots of group fitness instructors don't eat enough.
Yeah, because you're burning so many calories too. So what does your current sort of nutrition look like? If people, are listening and they're like, okay, what does she actually eat then? Because that's me eating a tuna and broccoli for lunch and then having a huge dinner. What should I eat? So what does your kind of rough nutrition plan look like at the moment?
So my coach does my nutrition and my meal plans, and I quite like a meal plan because it works for me, but it's really, really flexible. So I have like multiple options for breakfast, lunch, snacks, dinner. So normally, I don't know if this is a bit boring, but I wake up, I have bagel and jam before I go to the gym. Then when I get to work, I have oats, which I never get sick of, with a yummy vanilla protein, blueberries.
Oh, yep.
Lunch, I used to be plant-based. I've been eating meat recently. So I had chicken or tuna, rice, veggies, olives, hummus, whatever. And then it's very important for Kruger, my partner, and I, that we eat together and we enjoy dinner together. And like, I will not eat out of Tupperware for dinner. I draw the line there. So we always cook like fresh food, and that'll usually be like, I try and mix it up. So I have different veggies every night, different carb source, potato, kumara, rice, pasta, different protein sources, like heaps of variation. Obviously, I'm in the off season now, so more flexibility.
Yeah.
And I'll have a couple of meals off over the weekend, like won't go crazy, but like if I want to have poached eggs on toast with a friend at a cafe, like all good.
And you see the common theme there is that you've got like multiple times where you're having protein, but you've also got like just frequent meals too. Not necessarily like that's not necessarily like be all and end all. Like you don't have to do that, but you see that in your day, like you're consuming carbs regularly, you're consuming protein regularly. It's quite a balanced or like a whole diet. You're not just like, not necessarily doing fasting, that could work, or you're not doing keto, or you're not cutting out like a food group or anything. You're just eating like a balanced diet and having regular meal times.
For sure. And I guess the one thing I'd add, which I really love about my coach, is he's big emphasis on whole foods. People can get too far down the track of like, oh, super clean, like,
yeah,
80-20, have some treats in there. I have my jar of hot chocolate every night before bed, and like I have my jam, whatever. But I think sometimes one thing I've noticed about girls who compete is they kind of fall into that trap of like all those diet foods. So
if it fits your macros.
Yeah, like, and they'll like sugar-free maple, and their 501 bars, and then they'll have like jelly light, and then like their gut is just like
yeah.
So like, better to eat real food and you'll feel better.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a topic that I'm so passionate about, the whole if it fits your macros. I feel like there is that to a certain degree, absolutely, because then you have that flexibility. I could have rice or I could have pasta, but you're not including all the artificial sweeteners and all of that stuff into your diet simply because it does fit your calories, because like you said, it has a negative impact on your gut health.
Yeah, and I kind of noticed particularly in prep, like lots of girls get really carried away and they're making their like Biscoff overnight wheat bix, and it's got like a creamy protein layer, and then it's got crumbled Biscoff, and then it's got, and like, number one, that could drive you crazy, and like the sweeteners and stuff are wild, but also like, I don't know, it kind of can spike your blood sugar, and
and also who has time for that,
I know.
I love the overnight oats. I've been having them every day as well. Protein oats, and then like some berries or like banana and honey, and that's like every morning, like about like 10 a.m. I'm like always looking forward to having that. Have a coffee or something like.
Exactly.
That's so good, man.
Sweet treat, but it's the good sweet.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of your upcoming goals, what have you got on your horizon at the moment?
Well, I guess the immediate goal is to sort of enjoy the off season, like enjoy spending time with my friends and family, sort of a few other life goals, like saving for a house deposit and doing travel and that sort of stuff. But I guess long term, I would like to do another show, and I've got a bit of a plan with my coach, so it might be a different federation. Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
just also in the immediate future, it's really nice to have full energy and focus on my classes, because there's lots of exciting things coming up for workshops and Les Mills live events. So cool to be focused on that.
Yeah, man, that's exciting. Actually, I've got one more question before you wrap up. You mentioned you put a heavy emphasis on loving data tracking throughout the different styles of training that you've done. So right now, I'm thinking about people who are weight training but don't necessarily have a clear goal, don't necessarily track their data, the sets, reps, whatever. How do you track your data, and how do you create clear goals? Obviously you compete, so that's kind of like maybe a little bit different. So let's just say that the important thing is that you have a clear goal. Let's just park the competing because it's not relatable for everyone. So you have a clear goal. How do you track the data from your weight training?
Um, so it all started with the lovely Chloe, because
Mm-hmm.
when I first started training with her, she gave me this pink notebook, and I'm like such a pink princess, and I was just wrapped. And I know that you carry your notebook because I've seen you write your
Yeah.
workouts and you track your data too. Um, so started there, and I guess it's kind of twofold. Like, number one, having a program that you follow, so you're doing the same exercises each week and getting better, rather than just like going to the gym and being like, I'm going to do shoulders, I'll do
Mm-hmm.
a lat raise, I'll do a dumbbell raise, or whatever. Um, and what my coach uses now, which I love, is an app called Trainerize. And I know there are other
Mm-hmm.
apps out there on the market, but
Yeah.
I actually think it's something I'd recommend, whatever your fitness goals are, big or small, because you're going to do lat pull down, and you see that when you did the session last Tuesday, you did 30 kgs, and you say, oh well, I'm feeling really good today, like I've got more energy, I had a great sleep last night, I'm going to try to do 35, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
try get 2 more reps, or I'm really tired this week, I'm just going to do what I did last week. And yeah, I feel like the more people that could get on board with that, the more
Yeah.
progress they'd make.
And do you find that those micro goals keep you more motivated and sort of, I don't know, keep you really sort of interested and intrigued in your sessions to try and beat what you did last time?
For sure. And like, obviously in the off season as well, like it's very cool, like getting leaner and leaner, and you feel like, oh, I'm looking so good. And then in the off season, sometimes it's more challenging from a motivation perspective. But when you're seeing results like that, like, oh, cool, well, last week I hip thrust 80 and this week I'm hip thrusting 90, like I'm making progress. It's so rewarding.
Yeah, and that like, because it can be so easy to just stay focused on that long term, like 12-week goal or whatever it is, but being more sort of present with your training, I feel like makes you enjoy the process more rather than just always thinking about like what's at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And it's that whole concept of progressive overload, right? And again, I think it's something that people don't understand. And sometimes in the group fitness space, I'd have people say to me like, oh, what's the perfect schedule? Is it 2 RPM, 2 body pump, 2 body attack, and I'll make it? And it's like, progressive overload is everywhere. Like, you always, if you want to kind of advance in your training, you should be applying that to whatever you're doing. Because I don't know, the hack job analogy I always use in classes is the muscles are clever, they adapt quickly. So if you always do
Mhm.
the same shit, you won't get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And progressive overload, if people are listening and they don't know, it's exactly what you're touching on there. We're like, I did 30 last week, so this week I'm going to do 35, assuming that you're doing the same amount of reps. You're not doing 35 for 5 less reps. It's not really
Yeah,
progressive overload, but like constantly stacking up that progress so that your body's in a state to constantly adapt to what stimulus you're giving it.
yeah, and it's not just going heavier. It's like
Mm.
tempo change or rep change or isometric holds or whatever. There are so many different ways to do progressive overload. It's not just like heavier and heavier and
No.
heavier and heavier,
Yeah. And like one thing we touched on before when it comes to like posture and mobility, it's performing the exercise at the same weight but with better technique as well. Yeah.
And that's where I'd really, really recommend seeing a trainer, because like, I think I know how to do a deadlift, and then I go and see my coach and I get an execution tip that totally changes the feel of it. And we all get lazy and we all get naughty habits creeping in. And when you have someone's eyes on you, or even if you film yourself, like you can say, oh, actually, I'm doing this, or if I did this, I'd get that better mind muscle.
Yeah, and your body doesn't always work with you, like you say, right? It's always going to want to take the easiest path possible, so
For sure.
which is always through the strength and not through the right areas.
Totally.
Yeah. Now, if people would like to follow your journey, your competing journey and your personal journey, whereabouts is the best place for them to find you?
So I'm on Instagram. It's just my full name, all lowercase. I'm recently on TikTok because I've been
Oh,
trying to keep up with
yeah.
the younger generation, and I'm probably like the most cringe person on TikTok, but that's fine. Yeah, I'm also on TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, it works.
Oh, nice one. That's everything. That's good. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Ella. I really enjoyed picking your brain. I was looking forward to this episode, so it was nice
Ah,
to chat to you.
so great to chat. Thank you for having me.